And for more on the U.S. election, I'm joined now by Pierre Martin, a political science professor at the University of Montreal. He is also a contributor to the largest circulation newspaper in all of Quebec. Thanks so much for joining us. Roe's story is not unique for us. We've been looking at every kind of voter in recent days. Asian American voters, Hispanic voters, Muslim American voters. And we've shown the efforts to get them to the polls, but there's also been a lot written recently about the enthusiasm gap among African American voters. The U.S. president out trying to urge them to get to the polls. Of all of these groups, which one do you see as pivotal come Election Day?
Obviously, it will be the Hispanic Americans and African Americans because of their sheer numbers and because of this problem of mobilizing and generating enthusiasm and making sure that they participate in the vote, that they actually turn out in large numbers. That is, of course, the goal of the Democratic Party, and they do have quite an elaborate machine in the key states, for example, of Pennsylvania or Ohio or Florida, to make sure that happens. And it's part of their plan, and they're extremely well organized. But at the same time, there have been some concerns about perhaps not turning out as many advanced votes as they might have wished. But in general, from what I hear, they seem to be confident.
I mean, you just touched on some of these pivotal battleground states. Of course, Ohio, you mentioned it. It's one of them. The latest poll there showing Trump ahead by about 5 percentage points. But the same poll shows Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, with 5% of the vote. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, at 2%. Will this support for these lower-tiered candidates stay, or can they be peeled off by either of these two major candidates?
At this stage of the campaign, most of what had to be peeled off has been peeled off. But of course, if you have very tight races in some states and people feel that a vote for a third party might be wasted or might be actually a way to ensure that their least preferred candidates may be elected, they might actually drop their support for the third parties. But those supports are extremely low at this point, and there's no systematic direction in which they will go. So I don't think it makes much of a difference in terms of projecting the results at this point.
And as this race comes down to the wire, what do each of these candidates need to do to put themselves in the best position to win, do you think?
Well, Hillary Clinton is favored to win, and she is in advance in many states. And if she only keeps the level of support that she already has, she's in a good position. But the key for the Democratic Party is to turn out the vote. They do have some constituencies that do not tend to naturally go to the voting station as much as some of the Republican constituencies. But they are extremely well organized in the key states to make sure that they do turn out. At the same time, the Republican Party, because they are relying now on a constituency that is relatively new, the white, less educated voters are also not necessarily quite as likely to turn out to vote as their regular constituency, and there, the lack of organization, the kind of a deficit of organization of the Republicans might cost them a few bits of points that may be enough to turn around some of the races in some places.
Let me ask you about foreign policy, specifically China. Of course, Hillary Clinton, known as the architect of the pivot to China, and then, of course, Donald Trump having a lot of negative things to say about China. What about relations with China with either of these candidates as president?
Relations with China, with Donald Trump would be adversarial. I mean, the notion of trade conflicts, trade wars is approach to trade with China, as with any other country. Actually, my own country would be in a very difficult position in terms of trade with the United States, of which we are so dependent. But in terms of trade with Asia, because Donald Trump seems to have less confidence in organizations and agreements and settled rules, it may become a source of uncertainty that traders generally do not like. Whereas an election for Madam Clinton would mean that the established rules would continue to apply, and people involved in international trade and finance would find it more predictable, and therefore they might have a preference for that outcome.
Martin Pierre joining us from Montreal. Thanks so much.